we head on down to Wyoming Liberty Group. Maureen Bader hanging breathlessly by on the phone. How you been?
I've been pretty good down here.
Yeah,
Thanks.
not bad. Okay, and the weather is...
It's warmed up, thank goodness.
Okay, good. Yeah, I finally got out, but it's one of those, I can get out, I can walk around, but I'm also slip sliding all over the place because not everything has melted yet. So that's
true here also, yeah.
So our governor, Matt Mead, and again, and the reason for that opening, as you know, Maureen, is a lot of people that both you and I know went and voted for Matt Mead in the state of Wyoming, and they were convinced that, yep, I got to vote for Matt Mead because we need to keep a conservative in office. But I've been posting because, I'm a jerk. You know that, Maureen. I'm a real jerk. I've been posting, folks, you didn't actually vote for a conservative. I think you got a Democrat in office. I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but what do you think?
Well, I think Governor Mead, like a lot of people, want to have their cake and eat it too.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to appear to be a fiscal conservative, but at the same time, he wants to continue with the Santa Claus policies that have been going on here in Wyoming for the last, really almost 15 years now.
Yeah, well, let's face it. Wait, Maureen, he also wants the cake of the next generation, doesn't he?
Well, I think all he really cares about is that things stay more or less okay until he's out of office, which is only another 2 years.
Yeah.
And as we'll talk about in a little bit, essentially that seems to be his modus operandi now. Mm-hmm. Let's just keep on spending at current levels. We've got all these super important things to do, like more buildings at the University of Wyoming that nobody goes into, or are uninhabitable because the construction has essentially gone bad.
Right.
But at the same time, he wants to appear to be a fiscal conservative by saying, well, we've made all these cuts, which in fact in a lot of cases aren't cuts at all.
Well, okay. Before we get into what's been driving me nuts, and what's been driving me nuts, let's talk about some of the cuts, because he had a press conference and he was laying out some of the things that he would like to cut. Can you say that there was legitimately anything that he really did cut that is a legitimate good cut?
Yeah, in fact, there was one thing, and this is something I've written about, and it was published in both major dailies here in the state, and I also testified about this before the Revenue Committee last week, and that was whether they should increase the tobacco tax or not. Because what has happened is that back in 1998, there was something called the Tobacco Settlement Trust Fund was set up. So we had this tobacco settlement between 46 states and the big tobacco companies, and essentially the result of that was that the states were going to get an initial amount plus a payment into perpetuity. So what the state did, and what a lot of states did, was set up a fund that then would earn interest, and that's what we've done here. And then with that interest plus the amount from the tobacco companies, they were going to be getting then an amount that would fund tobacco cessation programs, and in here in Wyoming, they also fund stop drug cessation programs as well.
Yeah.
And so, needless to say, you've got a whole bunch of programs across 3 or 4 departments that have got, just like any government program, escalating costs. But what we have with the Tobacco Settlement Trust Fund, because money hasn't really been going back into it very much to sort of protect it from inflation, we've got interest payments that are sort of getting smaller, and of course the interest environment here is also one of a very, very low interest rates. So the interest coming out of this is small, but also the amount of money coming from the tobacco companies is going down because people are smoking less.
Hmm.
So there is about a $14 million deficit to pay for those entitlement programs. Right. The governor actually said you have to cut $12 million.
Well, now, let me add a couple of things in here, though. For smokers out there, if buying cigarettes in a state has some higher cost to it because of taxes or something like that, then they can get tobacco online, which is a whole lot cheaper. For example, someone who likes to smoke cigars, a $12 cigar at a retail store you can get online for $2. So maybe it's not smoking less as so much buying it from someplace else.
Well, of course, that's the big deal. And of course, here in Wyoming, we've got the big reservation. And if an Indian retailer selling to an Indian, but I mean, how do you know who's an Indian, who's not, pays no tax. So you can actually get cigarettes very cheaply here. I mean, we've got one of the lowest cigarette taxes in the nation. And what also happens, and as a result, is we get a lot of cigarette smuggling out of Wyoming to other high tax jurisdictions.
Yeah.
So that is one place. So obviously, raising the tobacco tax was not going to be any sort of long-term source of funding for these entitlement programs. The governor recognized that. He told, in particular, the health department, you're going to have to make a real cut. So there was, in fact, a real cut there. There was also, in fact, a reduction from last year's sort of subsidy program to state subsidies to local communities. So that went from about 175 million down to 90 million. But we got to keep in mind here is this is only sort of the first pass in the whole budget process. That's the governor's budget. You're going to be seeing a lot of lobbying on the part of local communities and local community representatives now to the Joint Appropriations Committee, which is now going to be reviewing the governor's recommendations, plus every single budget for every single agency. And then what's going to happen is that the budget bill goes to the floor, both the House and the Senate, and we're going to, all of these legislators are also going to be facing a waft of lobbying by these local communities to try to get that funding up as well. So whether that so-called cut actually stays where it is, gets lower or goes higher, we really won't know until the end of the budget session, which will be sometime near the end of February, beginning of March.
I bet I could give you a long list of things that they could have cut that didn't, or you could give it to me.
Well, the other thing, the thing is, there was a $19 million reduction in what they call the standard budget for all the agencies. The standard budget essentially is last year's budget stripped of all of its exception spending or one-year spending, and then increased by some sort of inflationary amount that would allow the agency to provide the same level of service in this biennium as they provided in the last biennium. There were actually, supposedly anyway, $19 million in cuts. Now, in order to figure that out, I would have to go through every single budget for every single agency and see what was cut. Now, one of the things that I did notice in the Department of Tourism's budget is that the $900,000 for film subsidies is gone. Now, where it's gone, I don't know. So, and the other thing too, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about a couple of years ago when we had this supposedly draconian across-the-board 6% budget cut that then got given back to all these agencies at that time. A lot of times what happens with these so-called budget cuts is that they're not cuts at all, but they're just delays in spending. And deferred maintenance is a really big guilty party there. And the Game and Fish Department was just notorious for saying, well, we had these millions and millions of dollars of maintenance that we were supposed to do this year. We'll just put it off to next year. So that means our budget went down by, the amount that it was supposed to go down by. That's just smoke and mirrors. Those are what I call the bogus budget cuts.
But wasn't the Game and Fish Department supposed to be making money off of people using their services?
Well, that's where they get most of their revenue, in fact, is through hunting and fishing license fees and a variety of other kinds of fees. But they've been trying to get their fees increased, and we've managed to fight that off every single year. And so their new strategy is to try to offload some of their costs to the general fund. But the general fund is much smaller for the next biennium, and even smaller for the next biennium after that, where they can't really afford to take on all these extra costs that are trying to be offloaded by some of these departments that are supposed to be funding themselves through other sources of revenue. So, but that's what the governor needs to do. He needs to say, look, this is your budget, this is your revenue. Reduce your costs so that you can actually provide the services that you're supposed to provide. Eliminate whatever it is that you've taken on as part of your mandate creep, and the Game and Fish Department is notorious for that. And get back to just sort of the basics. But of course, what we need to see first, and really almost no one is talking about this, except of course Bobby Jindal when we had him here a couple of weeks ago, is that what we need to start doing first, like step one, is really to define the role of government. What is it that government should be doing, and let's just jettison everything that government shouldn't be doing. Anything that the private sector can do, the government shouldn't be doing.
Right, and this is where, and we'll get into it in just a moment, where the governor again is pushing, the idea of Medicaid expansion. But of course, I want to hold that off for just a moment. After the break, let's really get into that and focus on it. But of course, the governor once again sees an opportunity to reach into the rainy day fund, right?
Yeah, no. He's got his operating budget, and he did manage to bring the operating budget down to a level that the projected revenues will actually cover off, and leave $30 million extra. You're thinking, so that's where you say, oh, okay, this guy's a fiscal conservative.
Yeah.
In the next breath, you realize, okay, no, he's not, because what he's saying is, well, we've reduced our ongoing expenditures, but gee, we've got all these really, really important things we just have got to do, and that adds up to almost $500 million. Well, wait a second. You only had $30 million extra, and you want to spend $500 million? Where's all this extra going to come from?
Now, Maureen, I prepared something special just for this moment.
Like the rains down in Africa. She would rain. Raindrops are falling on my head.
Rain, rain, go away.
Stop the rain. Tuck it away. Save it for a rainy day. Save it for a rainy day.
What I'm going to do is take that entire montage and send it to the governor with a note from you that I'm going to forge your name. So
Okay.
yeah.
But he tried to do this during the last session, and the legislators said, no, we're not going to raid the rainy day fund. So he's made a little bit of a tricky change this time to, I guess, sweeten the pot. He's saying, well, it's not that we're going to raid the rainy day fund. We're just going to borrow from the rainy day fund. And you think, okay, well, that sounds interesting. And then in the next breath, he says, we're going to pay the rainy day fund back by stealing from the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund.
Oh, hey,
that's what a deal.
Perfect. That's great. Hey, Maureen, in case you didn't know this, the federal government is promising, Congress is promising to pay back the IOUs in Social Security. I'm over in the corner here holding my breath.
Yeah. So where's the money going to come from? So that's the thing that people don't seem to really understand a lot of time. The only money or revenue that the government gets is money that it takes out of your pocket. It's made all these savings, and this saving is just there like the cherry that's just so irresistible that we really actually have a good opportunity right now, because the only time you can ever get government to cut anything is in a crisis. So we're in a crisis now. Revenues are dropped off. We can either bring the size of the government down to a level that we can afford, and the size of government that's not interfering with the private sector market, so we can see some real economic growth instead of just growth of government. Because the other comment that Bobby Jindal made when he was down here, which is really true, is that you can grow the government economy or you can grow the American economy. You can't grow both. And that's because we have a limited amount of resources. So if the government is taking all of the resources to pay for political expediencies, that means we're not getting the right kind of resource. We're not getting resources directed to economic expediencies or what's important to grow the economy. We're getting what's important to make sure that these politicians get reelected last time.
Right. See, in the private sector, it actually produces stuff. And the government really doesn't produce anything, which it seems to me, Maureen, when I think in terms of fiscal conservative, I tend to think of somebody who likes to do things the simple way. In other words, if you're going to pay a bill, well, just give the guy cash, because if you go through a complicated payment system, it makes things worse. If you're running a government or a business, if some department has $1 million that is dedicated, earmarked for that department, that's their budget. And when you start doing all sorts of fancy robbing Peter to pay Paul, it makes a mess out of things, just for one. But also, it tends to confuse the money. I mean, if that makes sense, Maureen, it just confuses where the money's coming from, where it's going, and that's how we wind up in such a mess.
No, you're absolutely right. And this particular budget is a really good example of that. As you're saying, you've got this Medicaid expansion fantasy that's somehow bringing thousands of people into a poorly run government welfare program is going to save money. That's creative math for sure.
Yeah, I just want, for the record, everybody to understand that at this time of day, at this date, is December 3rd, and the time is, 2:26. A woman just said that I was right about something. So mark that down. Why does he want to continue to expand this? I mean, how much evidence does he need?
you know, sometimes you got to wonder. Again, it's he wants to have his cake and eat it too. That on the one hand, he's thinking, well, you know, I want to be a really nice guy, continue with the Santa Claus state mentality, the entitlement mentality, grow the entitlement state, bring more people into sort of welfare dependency on the government. Because, you know, more and more people depend on government. That means more and more people are going to be voting for bigger and bigger government, which then means that taxes have to go up. And it might be great for a while for people who are getting these handouts, but eventually, you know, as they say, the chickens come home to roost. You know, you run out, like Margaret Thatcher said, eventually you run out of the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. So you've got these programs like Medicaid or Indian Health Services or any of these, you know, in any of these kind of countries that have got the single payer system, like Canada, for instance, and of course I'm from Canada. Yeah. Then you know what happens is that you get this promise of free stuff. So the demand for that free stuff is very, very high. Yeah. But of course, this is not utopia. This is the real world, and resources are limited, and the supply of stuff to fulfill this demand for free stuff is, of course, limited.
Well, and the federal government's not going to come up with the money they've promised. We already seen that. And considering how many states, I mean, just our southern border here, Colorado, for Pete's sakes, and you look at Illinois and state after state where the Medicaid system is collapsing because the system has been overrun. Hasn't Governor Meade seen these numbers?
I don't know what he's thinking about this. I think he's looking at, again, this kind of goes back to the fact that he's only around for another 2 years. He just needs to make sure things last until he's gone. Once he's gone, well, he's gone. So he's off to do whatever it is he's going to do. But of course, he leaves the person who succeeds him with a really big problem. If now we've increased the number of people that are trapped in this program, because of course you've created this entitlement mentality, the people who are expecting this entitlement, and then to sort of just say then suddenly, oh, sorry, yeah, no, you're not going to get it. Yeah. Well, but of course the other problem that people always seem to forget whenever we talk about Medicaid or any kind of government provided service is that health insurance doesn't mean that you're going to have health care. So if you just because you have health insurance doesn't mean you're going to have access to care.
You've been writing extensively about this. Where do people find your work?
Yes, please go to wyliberty.org and check it all out.
All right. Maureen, as always, it's a pleasure, and I'll never let you live down the fact that you said that I was right.
You set me up.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Maureen.
Okay, bye.